At 3635 Pippin Court, in the calm suburbs of Mississauga, stood a house that should have been a symbol of peace. Sleek, modern, 6 bedrooms with tall windows that welcomed sunlight and a flat roof that gave it a contemporary look. To most, it was just another home in a quiet neighborhood. But behind those clean walls and trimmed hedges was a history that made neighbors whisper and visitors uneasy. In the span of 4 years, 3 members of the same family lost their lives inside this house, under mysterious, chilling circumstances. It became known not by its address, but by the stories that surrounded it. The cursed house. Locals avoided walking past it at night. Some said it carried a strange energy. Others claimed the house itself was haunted. But the truth, as it would slowly unravel, had nothing to do with ghosts and everything to do with people. Among them was Caleb Harrison, a man many remembered as gentle, soft-spoken, and deeply devoted to his children. After his divorce, he was trying to rebuild what remained of his life. That night, August 22nd, 2013, Caleb returned home after cheering for his daughter's soccer game. The house was quiet. The children were with their mother. He spoke to his new girlfriend on the phone, then went to bed. He never woke up again. The morning of August 23rd began like any other in the quiet neighborhood of Pippin Court, except Caleb Harrison didn't show up for work. His coworker called. No answer. Texted. Nothing. That alone was enough to raise alarms. Caleb was reliable to a fault, never missed a shift, never ignored messages. As the hours passed in silence, worry turned into urgency. His housekeeper, who had been cleaning since early morning, hadn't seen or heard him. Strange. By mid-morning, she and the coworker pushed open the bedroom door. What they found wasn't just unexpected, it was haunting. Caleb lay still on the bed, motionless, cold. The air shifted. Something was very wrong. Paramedics arrived quickly. But it didn't take them long to know they weren't dealing with a medical emergency. They were looking at a possible crime scene. Caleb's body showed signs of a struggle. 2 deep scratches on his chest, bruising around his neck and chin, and broken cartilage near the throat. There were even signs of damage to his fingernails, as if he had fought back in his final moments. And yet, there was no sign of forced entry, no broken windows, no open doors, nothing missing. Whoever had done this knew how to get in and how to leave without a trace. This wasn't a random act. It was targeted. It was personal. And as police began to investigate, they would soon learn that Caleb was not the first to die in this house, nor the second. Long before the whispers, before the tragedy, 3635, Pippin Court was simply a home built on love, resilience, and the hope of new beginnings. It belonged to Bill and Bridget Harrison, a couple whose story began in defiance of times. He was black, she was white. In 1969, theirs was a love that faced social backlash and family disapproval. But they didn't care. They saw each other, not the colors, not the noise, and built a life together in Ontario. By 1973, unable to have children of their own, they adopted a 6-month-old baby boy. They named him Caleb. 2 years later, the young family moved into the newly built house on Pippin Court. The walls of that home echoed with laughter, birthday songs, and quiet, reassuring love. Caleb was their world, but his early years weren't simple. He suffered from a tic disorder, which made him a target of schoolyard cruelty. Kids pointed, mocked, avoided him. Yet at home, there was always comfort. Bridget, now a teacher, and Bill, working his way up through a supermarket chain, made sure Caleb never felt less than. They believed in him, supported him, protected him. This house, once full of life, compassion, and Sunday dinners, was never meant to carry the weight it eventually would. What started as a safe haven would become a graveyard of secrets. And no one, not even the Harrisons, could have seen what the future held within those walls. Caleb Harrison met Melissa when he was 27 and working at his father's store. She was only 19, fresh out of high school, wounded by a failed engagement, and craving something stable. Caleb, with his quiet kindness and desire to build a family, seemed like the right answer at the right time. Their relationship moved fast, too fast. Within months, they were married and building a life together, just a short drive from the house on Pippin Court. Soon after, they had 2 children, a son and a daughter. From the outside, they looked like the perfect suburban family, young parents, a home, children, and a future ahead of them. But the smiles faded quickly. Behind closed doors, tension built like pressure in a sealed room. Their arguments became louder, more frequent, more venomous. In 2005, things erupted. After a particularly intense fight, Melissa called the police, and Caleb was briefly detained. That was the final fracture. They divorced soon after. Melissa was granted full custody of the children, and though Caleb was devastated, he agreed to shared parenting. But peace was short-lived. In the years that followed, Caleb made mistakes, one of them deadly. In 2008, he was involved in a drunk driving accident that left 1 person dead and others injured. He was sentenced to 18 months in jail. During that time, custody of the children was transferred temporarily to Bill and Bridget. And while they provided a loving home, Melissa was furious. She believed Caleb's parents were stealing time from her children. Her resentment deepened, and beneath her calm surface, something darker began to stir. When Caleb was released from jail in 2010, he came home to a life that felt both familiar and fractured. He moved back into the house on Pippin Court with his parents and tried to rebuild again. He wanted to be a better father, a better man. But Melissa had changed too. She had a new partner now, Chris, a man she met online. Their relationship was intense, and so was Melissa's determination to keep the children away from Caleb and his family. Custody was no longer just a legal arrangement. It became a war zone. Melissa accused Caleb, and even his aging parents, of mistreating the kids. She filed complaints that were never substantiated. There were no bruises, no medical reports, no witnesses. But the accusations kept coming, creating a dark cloud over the Harrisons. Caleb, too, had moved on romantically, but unlike Melissa, he didn't lash out. She did. She sent emails filled with rage. She called the Harrisons selfish, manipulative. In one, she wrote, "You will pay the price for what you've done." And it didn't stop there. Online, she began posting messages describing Caleb as dangerous and unstable, urging others to sign petitions against him. She even claimed that if she couldn't raise her children herself, then no one else should be allowed to. The battle lines were drawn, and as her resentment grew louder, more public, and more venomous, the Harrisons had no idea just how far she was willing to go, or how dangerous this game of custody and control would become. It was a rainy April evening in 2009 when Bridget Harrison returned home from a school meeting, expecting to see the porch light on and her husband, Bill, waiting with his usual warm smile. But the house was dark, eerily quiet. Something felt off. She called out his name. No response. Her footsteps quickened as she moved through the house, only to find Bill lying motionless in the front hallway. He wasn't breathing. Paramedics arrived, but it was too late. Bill Harrison, the quiet, dependable pillar of the family, was gone. Authorities ruled an accident. They claimed he had fallen down the stairs, striking his chest and causing a fatal cardiac arrhythmia. But the bruises on his neck, on his face, didn't sit right with Bridget. She pleaded with the police. Her husband had no history of heart problems, and the injuries didn't match a simple fall. Caleb, recently released from jail, was devastated. His father had been his rock, the one who stood by him through his darkest moments. But his grief quickly turned into suspicion. Something didn't add up. Despite the questions, the case was closed quickly, too quickly. The coroner's report was vague, and without a formal autopsy, doubts turned into frustration. Making matters worse, Bill's body was cremated before a second opinion could be obtained. Any chance at further investigation went up in smoke. It was the first unexplained death inside the house, and it wouldn't be the last. It happened again, this time even more painfully. On the morning of October 21st, 2010, Bridget Harrison's lifeless body was discovered by her grandson at the foot of the stairs inside the same house where Bill had died just a year earlier. The scene was jarring. Her neck was bruised, her face scratched, ribs broken. This wasn't the body of someone who slipped. It was the body of someone who had fought hard. Paramedics arrived, and investigators began asking questions. But the questions would once again lead nowhere. Caleb Harrison, now living in the house with his mother, was the immediate suspect. After all, 2 parents gone in 2 years under the same roof? It was a reasonable suspicion. But Caleb had a solid alibi. He wasn't home the night before. Witnesses confirmed it. Security footage backed it up. The police had no other leads. No forced entry. No fingerprints. No clear motive. It was déjà vu with the same outcome. Despite the bruising, the broken bones, and the history of unresolved trauma inside that house, the case was quickly stamped with a chilling label: undetermined cause of death. No further investigation. No suspects. No justice. The system failed again. And once more, the house at 3635 Pippin Court swallowed its truth. Now, 2 parents were gone, and no one, not even Caleb, could shake the feeling that something sinister was lurking, hiding in plain sight, protected by silence. In the wake of Bridget's death, something surfaced, something that would shift the story from tragedy to suspicion. Hidden within the quiet corners of her home, Bridget had left behind her personal diary. It wasn't full of poetry or family memories. It was filled with fear. Page after page described troubling encounters with Melissa, shouting matches, emotional outbursts, and threats that no longer felt like empty words. One entry stood out. Melissa had locked the children in the car, refusing to let them see their grandparents. "You'll pay for this," she reportedly screamed through the window. At the time, it seemed like bitterness. In hindsight, it felt like a warning. Then came the emails. Recovered from old inboxes and archives, they were chilling. Melissa had written, "If Caleb isn't raising my children, no one else will." Another read, "I don't want them near those people ever again." These weren't casual frustrations. They were declarations. Possessive, obsessive, and above all, dangerous. The timeline began to form a pattern that no detective could ignore. Bill dies, custody shifts to Caleb. Bridget dies, custody remains with Caleb. Then, finally, Caleb dies, and Melissa regains custody. 3 deaths, all beneficiaries of her anger, all in her way. This wasn't about misfortune anymore. Police began to ask a new question. Was this house cursed? Or had someone been playing the long game, carefully, methodically, and fatally? With suspicion sharpening, investigators shifted into quiet pursuit. No more waiting. No more assuming. They placed GPS trackers on Melissa and Chris's vehicles and began collecting items from their trash, bottles, receipts, anything that might carry a trace. Every move was monitored, every discarded object a potential clue. Then came the computers. Melissa's devices, once seized under a search warrant, opened a window into a mind preoccupied with control and with death. Search histories revealed terrifying phrases. How long does it take to suffocate someone? How to extract poison from oleander? How to kill without getting caught? These weren't idle curiosities. These were blueprints. Still, none of it was enough until a conversation was recorded. A microphone, hidden in a holding room, captured Chris whispering to Melissa, unaware of the ears listening. "You're stupid," he hissed. "I confessed, so they go easier on me. They don't have proof about your mom." That was the crack investigators needed. Days later, confronted again, Chris broke. His words were cold, emotionless. He admitted he entered Caleb's house, that they struggled, that Caleb fought back but lost. Chris insisted Melissa had no idea what he planned. That was all his doing. But police weren't convinced. The digital trail, the diary, the timeline, the threats, and now the confession. One thing was finally clear. Caleb hadn't died because of a curse. He had died because someone wanted him gone. And they had planned it well. By the time the trial began in 2017, the courtroom was heavy with years of unanswered questions. Caleb was gone. Bridget was gone. Bill had died without explanation. Now, at last, Melissa and Chris were on trial, not only for what they did, but for everything the system failed to see. The prosecution moved swiftly. For Chris, the evidence was devastating. His DNA under Caleb's fingernails, his recorded confession, the surveillance, the digital footprints. The jury didn't take long. He was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder, for Caleb and for Bridget, and sentenced to 25 years without the possibility of parole. Melissa's trial wasn't as clear-cut. She wasn't physically present at the scenes. There was no smoking gun, but her words, her online threats, her search history, and her connection to Chris painted a disturbing picture of manipulation and control. The jury agreed, partly. Melissa was convicted in the murder of Caleb, but in Bridget's case, the jury deadlocked. There would be no conviction. The system called it a hung jury. Caleb's family called a heartbreak. And Bill? His case was never reopened. With his body cremated and the evidence long gone, there was nothing to try, nothing to prove, only suspicions buried with his ashes. For the Harrison family, the verdicts brought a bitter taste of closure. Justice, delayed and incomplete, had arrived too late. In their eyes, the real tragedy wasn't just what Melissa and Chris had done. It was how many times the system had looked the other way and let them do it. In the end, the question remains, was the house on 3635, Pippin Court, truly cursed, or was it something far more disturbing? A string of coincidences or a chain of avoidable tragedies enabled by human failure? Bill Harrison's death was dismissed without a second thought. Bridget's death followed a year later, full of bruises and broken bones. Yet still, no justice. Only when Caleb was found lifeless in the same house, under eerily similar circumstances, did the system finally start to pay attention. But by then, it was too late. 3 people were gone. 3 warnings had been ignored. If Bill's case had been properly investigated, if the bruises had raised alarms instead of excuses, would Bridget still be alive? Would Caleb have been spared? The haunting truth is that evil doesn't always wear a mask or knock loudly on the door. Sometimes it slips in through familiar voices, trusted smiles, and the belief that certain people couldn't possibly do harm. That belief allowed a plan to take root and grow in silence, until it swallowed a family whole. Today, 3635, Pippin Court has new owners. The rooms have been repainted, the memories sealed behind drywall, the shadows pushed aside by bright windows and clean floors. But those who know the story still glance toward it with unease. The whispers have not gone quiet. The Harrison family's tragedy is no longer just a local mystery. It's a cold reminder that when justice sleeps, evil writes the ending.